Pledge of Allegiance this morning will be led by Jordan Edwin Davis from Overland High School in Aurora.
Will you please join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Kohler, please take the roll.
Representatives Becker.
Walk over closer.
Buck. Buckner. Conti. Corum. Court. Del Grosso. Dorr. Duran. Everett. Representative Everett.
Excused.
Excused. Exum. Fields. Fisher. Foote. Garcia. Gardner. Giroux. Janal. Hamner. Holbert. Hollyhorse. Humphrey. Joshi. Kagan. Kraft Tharp. Labuda. Landgraf. Representative Landgraf. Oh. Lawrence. Lebsock. Lee. May. McCann. Representative McCann. President McLaughlin. McNulty. Melton. Mitch Bush. Moreno. Murray. Navarro. Nordberg. Pabon. Peniston. Pedersen. Primavera. Priola. Rankin. Rosenthal. Ryden. Sane. Salazar. Schaefer is excused. Scott, excused. Singer. Sonnenberg, excused. Stevens. Stevens and Zabo. Okay. Excused. Swam. Representative Swam, where'd he go? Oh, he's back there. Zabo, excused. Tyler. Representative Tyler. Vigil. Waller. Williams. Wilson. Wright. Young. Speaker Fairnier.
With 59 members present, 6 excused, a quorum is present. Representative Rosenthal, you're supposed to do the journal.
Okay.
Representative Rosenthal, you'll be doing this all week, every day, at the same place. Hopefully not with that jacket every day.
Mr. Speaker,
Representative Rosenthal.
Mr. Speaker, you're just jealous.
That is definitely not the truth.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the reading of the Journal of March 4th, 2014 be dispensed with and approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk. Is it March 4th? What is
March 3rd, yesterday.
March 3rd, my bad.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. If we didn't have caucus, I'd make him read it, but people have to get back to caucus. The motion is passed. Members, we are going to move right into memorials. We'll do introduction and resolution, introductions and announcements later this afternoon or later after. So members, please return to your desks for consideration of memorials. Mr. Kohler, please read the title to HM 1002.
House Memorial 1002 by Representative Rankin, memorializing former Congressman Mike Strang.
Representative Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move House Memorial 14-1002 and ask that it be read.
Whereas Colorado's respected former Congressman Mike Strang departed this life on January 12, 2014. And whereas Congressman Strang was born in Bucks County, Pennsylvania on June 17, 1929, spent most of his childhood in Colorado, served in the United States Army, completed his education at Princeton University, and worked as an investment banker in New York before returning to Colorado. And whereas Congressman Strang and his wife Kit made their home in the Missouri Heights area near Carbondale, where they established a ranch and raised 4 children. And whereas in 1970, Congressman Strang was elected to the Colorado House of Representatives, where he served for 4 years, representing the people of Eagle, Garfield, Pitkin, Rio Blanco, and Lake counties. And whereas, as a member of the Colorado House of Representatives, Congressman Strang served on several committees, including Business Affairs, Game, Fish, and Parks, Labor and Employment Relations, Rules, and State Affairs. And whereas, during his service in the Colorado legislature, Congressman Strang proved to be far ahead of his time by introducing a bill to legalize marijuana, a proposition that would come to fruition approximately 40 years later. And whereas Congressman Strang's service and civic engagement continued when he was elected in 1984 to the U.S. Congress, where he served in the House of Representatives for 2 years, representing the sprawling Western Slope District. And whereas, following his time in Washington, Congressman Strang returned home to the Carbondale area, where he spent time on horse and cattle ranching and consulting on natural resources issues. And whereas after 84 years, Congressman Strang passed away from too many summers, the old cowboy adage he was fond of quoting. And whereas friends and family remember Congressman Strang as good-natured, witty, intelligent, and genuinely interested in helping people. And whereas it is fitting that we, the members of the House of Representatives of the 69th General Assembly, pay tribute to the dedicated service of Congressman Mike Strang and express our deep regret and sorrow occasioned by his death. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 69th General Assembly of the State of Colorado that in the death of Congressman Mike Strang, the people of the State of Colorado have lost a dedicated public servant, an outstanding citizen, and that we, the members of the House of Representatives of the 69th General Assembly, do hereby extend our deep and heartfelt sympathy to the members of his family and pay tribute to someone who served his state well and faithfully. Be it further resolved that copies of this memorial be sent to Congressman Strang's wife, Kit Strang, his daughter, Bridget Strang of Carbondale, his daughter, Lori Strang Cunningham of Coachella, California, and his son, Scott Strang of Monroe, Virginia.
Representative Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a somewhat more personal memorial for me than others because Mike Strang was my neighbor and friend. I first met Congressman Strang a few years ago when I first got involved in politics, and I was delighted to learn there was a former congressman and one who had proposed legalizing marijuana 40 years ago living within 2 miles of my home. So over those intervening years, Mike's been in my home several times and supported me and my political maneuvers. So it's a very special family in our area. So we have lost an outstanding citizen and former congressman. Our area in Missouri Heights near Carbondale is historically potato farming and ranching, And over the years, the Strang Ranch has become a sort of a focal point for many things. It's the local sod farm, for one thing, is the most popular horse breeding facility, and 2 years ago hosted the National Sheepdog Trials. So, you know, for our whole community, it was sort of a center of activity, and the Strangs were very well known. I ride my bicycle by their ranch quite often and look over and thought about Mike and his service. Evidently, I knew him in his later years, but evidently he was quite a character. I've talked to several people who ran in the, I think it's 1984 congressional race with and against him, and evidently he was quite a character. So we will miss them, and our prayers are with the Strang family as you know, they are still recovering from their recent loss. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank Representative Rankin for memorializing this fine gentleman. You know, he was a voice of rural Colorado for many, many years, even out after he got out of the legislature. But you know, I say that Mike Strang was a guy who walked his own trail. He created his own way. And if you will look at the photograph at the bottom, okay, there's a cowboy sitting on a Mercedes with a license plate that says cows wearing tennis shoes. Now, that's not that common in rural Colorado, I assure you. But Mike Strang was a guy who knew who he was and he knew where he came from, and it was an honor to have met him. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question for the House is the passage of House Memorial 1002. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representatives Pabon, McNulty, close the machine. With 59 aye votes, 0 no votes, 6 excused, and 0 absent, House Memorial 1002 is passed. Representative Rankin.
Mr. Speaker, I move the current roll call of the House be added as co-sponsors.
Seeing no objection, the current roll call will be listed as co-sponsors for House Memorial 1002. We'll proceed to our next order of business, third reading of bills, final passage. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of the House Bill 1182.
House Bill 1182 by Representative Hamdahl, Senator Kirk, concerning changes for the 2015 school year to certain public education accountability measures specified in the Education Accountability Act of 2009 to accommodate the transition to administering new statewide assessments.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of House Bill 1182 on third reading and final passage.
Seeing no discussion, the question for the House is the passage of House Bill 1182 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Close the machine. Oh. Thank you, Mr. Kohler. Close the machine. With 59 aye votes, 0 no votes, 6 excused, and 0 absent, House Bill 1182 is passed. Co-sponsors. Close the machine. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of the House Bill 1256.
House Bill 1256 by Representative Fisher, also Senator Kirk, concerning authorizing institutions of higher education to enter into employment contracts for librarians.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of House Bill 1256 on third reading and final passage.
Seeing no discussion, the question for the House is the passage of House Bill 1256 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representative McNulty. Close the machine. With 59 aye votes, 0 no votes, 6 excused, and 0 absent, House Bill 1256 is passed. Co-sponsors. Close the machine. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of the Senate Bill 83.
Senate Bill 83 by Senator Crowder, also Representative Ferrandino, concerning reimbursement to be paid by a county to the state for costs incurred by the state in connection with the reappraisal of property in the county.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Senate Bill 83 on third reading and final passage.
Seeing no discussion, the question before the House, the passage of Senate Bill 83 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representative McCann. Close the machine. With 60 aye votes, 0 no votes, 5 excused, and 0 absent, Senate Bill 83 is passed. Co-sponsors. I can wait all day. Close the machine. Yeah, but you have to go to caucus. I don't. Well, yeah, actually, that's true. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1206.
House Bill 1206, Representative Conti, also Senator Newberry, concerning modifications to the Colorado Charitable Solicitations Act in connection with prohibiting certain charitable solicitation practices, modifying the Secretary of State's finding authority, adjusting registration statement requirements, and specifying requirements for appointing registered agents.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of House Bill 1206 on third reading and final passage.
Seeing no discussion, the question for the House, the passage of House Bill 1206 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representative Rankin. Close the machine. With 60 aye votes, 0 no votes, 5 excused, and 0 absent, House Bill 1206 is passed. Co-sponsors. Close the machine. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1017.
House Bill 1017, Representative Duran, All-Star, and Newberry, concerning measures to expand the availability of affordable housing in the state in connection with making modifications to statutory provisions establishing the Housing Investment Trust Fund, the Housing Development Grant Fund, the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, and making an appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of House Bill 1017 on third reading and final passage.
Representative Singer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to serve with you and all of you, actually. I encourage an aye vote on House Bill 1017. I did a lot of thinking about this last night, and I thought of a quote that actually came from a very old politician, Confucius, who said, "On the road to revenge, be prepared to dig 2 graves." On a lot of days, people ask me how I like serving at the Capitol, and I usually tell them 9 days out of 10 aren't bad. Well, yesterday was number 10 for me. And after debating a bill that brought together developers and faith groups and affordable housing advocates, we saw a failed amendment that, in my opinion, turned into partisan fodder. So when I first thought of coming up here, I thought of accusing one side of the aisle of playing politics. And then I imagined the line of opponents, only one so far, that would come to the well, not to discuss the flood recovery bill, but not to discuss the flood recovery bill. See what I started? But to focus on some level of petty partisanship that I might even be accused of starting. So I thought again of my favorite politician who said, "On the road to revenge, be prepared to dig 2 graves." So last night I went back to my flood file and I started looking through the profiles of the flood victims in my county who now lie in graves. There was a math teacher in Lyons, a purveyor of a community hub in Jamestown, a young college couple in Boulder. How would I be honoring their memory with my righteous anger and partisanship? I tell my constituents about how proud I am of our flood committee and how we've worked together to resolve our differences and avoid partisan battles that would result in a terrible human cost. Of course, Washington, D.C. has set a pretty low bar for us in terms of expectations. I just hope we don't fall below that bar on the second most partisan day of the year. The failed amendments in this bill were not without merit and deserve a full and fair hearing. And last night, a woman from Larimer County called me outside my district, and she knew I was not her representative, but somehow she got my number and she needed help. She had lost her home and everything in it in the flood, and she asked what I could do. I thought of this bill and I thought of this amendment, and sadly, because she didn't own her house that she lived in, the amendment might not have helped, and frankly, she needs more immediate help than anything in this bill could provide for. So I gave her the names and numbers for several community groups in Larimer County, and she was grateful. It didn't matter to me where she or anyone comes from, because when it came to her situation, or even this bill, it's about how we can work together and how we can help each other. While on the road to revenge, we need to be prepared to dig two graves. We as a body cannot afford to waste time with petty partisanship when it comes to the flood or this bill. I know we can avoid the road to revenge if we build those bridges of bipartisanship on a road to recovery. Let's give this bill a big, strong, bipartisan send-off to the Senate. Let's give their committees the time and resources to debate the amendment that failed yesterday and how to best help flood victims with flood victims at the table. I know that we can build a better Colorado, but we can only accomplish this if we do it together. Please give House Bill 1017 a strong bipartisan send-off, and please vote yes. Thank you.
Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I wasn't going to come to the well, although I've been thinking about it, because I received an email from a woman that testified before the Appropriations Committee last Friday, and those of you that know appropriations know that we don't take public testimony except for the supplementals and the long bill, because we are the committee of reference. And I'm not exactly sure how the decision was made, but the two people that testified were very true and very sincere in their support of the bill. My concern about this bill doesn't have anything to do with the flood, because I actually think the problem of affordable housing is much older than the flood. And it is a very grave concern to me. It's also a very grave concern to, I would think, any community in Colorado. My problem with the bill is that the system that we have set up right now, as far as the construction, the world of construction right now, and the laws that have already been put in place by this body, we've basically killed affordable housing in the private sector. And this bill does nothing to help that. So to me, this isn't about partisanship. This isn't about flood victims, although I had flood victims in my district and my heart goes out to them. This bill is about providing affordable housing to those that need housing, but can't necessarily afford housing. To me, this bill is a missed opportunity. What this bill will do is really nothing in helping those individuals that it could help. That was my problem with this bill, is that you can go ahead and you can vote for this bill, but please understand that if you made a promise to someone that is in need of affordable housing, this bill will do nothing in moving the situation forward. That's why I'm opposed to this bill, because I believe if you're going to take the time to run legislation, to ask these individuals to come down, take time out of their work to testify, that we should really be doing something down here. This bill just doesn't do anything. So I'll be a no vote.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I also was going to be content with sitting there in my chair and just voting the way that I planned on voting. But it is tough for me to sit there in my chair and be lectured to about how if I oppose a bill or support an amendment, that somehow that's playing party politics, somehow it's being revengeful or vengeful or whatever by trying to offer suggestions to try to make a bill better than what I perceive it to be. So I kind of take offense to the lecture that I was receiving this morning, and felt like that I needed to at least come down here and say something. That may or may not have been the intent to offend people, but that is the effect that it had. Now, obviously, people say stuff all the time that offends people, and that's life. We don't have the right to not be offended. But I also have the right to come up here and say, you know what, I disagree with what you were saying. And the reality is, when this bill first came out, there was nothing to deal with flood victims and people with natural disasters. And then as it started moving through the process, it became, well, that's a great talking point. And I could say that you were playing party politics with natural disasters in a way to push your bill through, and I could point a finger at you and say that's what you're doing with this bill, but I never said that along the way. The sponsor of the bill did make an effort, and I will commend Representative Duran for at least going partially there to talk about a prioritization system as far as when this money is allocated out, that we'll put some of those that were in need, that were affected by a disaster higher up in the queue system, and I commend her for that. But we felt like that it still needed to go farther beyond that. And if that was truly what we were saying this bill was about helping those that were affected with flood victims. And I, as well as Representative Singer and several other folks in this chamber, still have people to this day that are trying to search to get affordable housing as a result of the natural disasters that are there. And we do recognize that there is a need for more affordable housing. And so there is some merits to that, but we felt like that if we're going to truly say that that's what this bill is about, let's put some dollars behind that. Now, I can say there was party politics when we said, you can't bring an amendment on second reading, or if you do, somehow that's inappropriate. Gosh, unless this was brought up in committee, we don't even want to discuss that, and how our amendment was, I felt, was maybe unfairly attacked. But I didn't bring that up yesterday either. And the fact is, we felt like there was a positive amendment that we could have made this bill better. Had nothing to do with being vengeful, had nothing to do with playing party politics. It was like, if that's what this bill is about, let's do that. And then I also share some of the same concerns that Representative Giroux has, that I truly believe that when we look at statistics, where we were 7 years ago to compare to where we are now, 26% of the inventory of multifamily homes was the inventory that was being built. Now we're down to 2 or 3%. That's statistics. That's not something that Del Grosso pulled out of his hat. That's reality. And our problem with this is to think that if we're just going to dangle a few dollars of a credit in front of somebody, that that's going to somehow solve the problem. We're kidding ourselves, folks. And that is why I am against this bill, and I urge a no vote. Thank you.
Representative Tyler. No? Is there any further discussion? Representative Duran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do rise in support of this bill today, and for many reasons. But because I think so many of us have constituents in our district that are struggling to get by and struggling to make ends meet. And when we think about the need for more access to reasonably priced homes, it is an issue that has hit every single corner of this state in both rural and urban areas. And I think that is why you have seen such broad support for this bill, from developers to business to nonprofits to organizations that touch every single community in Colorado, including those in the rural areas and those in the urban areas. There was conversation about let's put dollars behind the priority for flood victims. Well, we already did that. The amendment that is in the bill right now giving priority to flood victims already puts dollars behind that. And the amendment that was offered yesterday by Minority Leader Del Grosso and Representative Doran argued on behalf of both of those, set an arbitrary bar at 50%. We need to make sure that we do everything we need to for flood victims, even if it's beyond that 50%. And that's why the policy that is in the bill is better than the amendment that was offered. Also, this bill to say that we're just putting out a couple of dollars through a tax credit is not accurate. In fact, this tax credit was inspired by the Reagan administration. It is a meaningful tool to build public and private partnerships to address the issues at hand. Research shows that affordable housing built with housing tax credits can create jobs and economic activity and generate millions of dollars in local income and tax revenue. According to a study by the National Association of Home Builders, Colorado's economy may add up to $151 million in income, $27 million in taxes and other revenue for the state and local governments, and more than 2,179 jobs by building and rehabilitating 1,374 subsidized homes. And I think because there was so much work put into this bill and such a great stakeholder process is a reason why there was not one person who came to testify against this bill in either committee. And there was mention of a woman that showed up on the day of appropriations who isn't used to what goes on in this Capitol, but she's a social worker, and she was so inspired by the bill that she decided to show up and testify for the Capitol, for the bill at the Capitol for her very first time. And so, yes, we did allow that woman to come and talk about her story and why she thought this bill was important to her community. So please vote yes. I would hope that we would be able to do this in a bipartisan way to support our flood victims, to support the homeless, to support the disabled, to support so many Colorado families who are struggling to make ends meet. And I respectfully ask for your support. Thank you.
Representative Dorr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't initially going to come down and talk about this in third reading, but since the amendment that I ran was brought up at the beginning of this discussion, I decided I better have my say and give a little bit of explanation as to why the amendment was run, because everybody else seems to have the idea of why I did what I did. The answer is that I sat on local affairs. I was lobbied many times before the local government committee hearing this bill its initial times, and was told that some of this money would be used to support the flood victims of northern Colorado. And so when the bill came up, and I waited and waited for that moment of how much money would be used to help those victims, I never heard it. I spoke to the sponsor and I said, I have a little bit of concern. I'm lobbied on this issue with regards to affordable housing, but not told exactly how much money would go to help the flood victims, of which I was told are part of the plan. And I never saw that amendment in its process. So when it came to the floor in second readings, I offered an amendment that designated money for flood victims, as I was told this bill would do. The argument against my amendment was that, well, there's language in there that says flood victims get priority. Friends, I have stood in lines at airports and other places where they're supposedly priority lines, and it doesn't necessarily go any faster than the regular line. So priority by itself wasn't enough for me. So I added the language in the amendment. It's not partisanship. It's not partisanship to say we want to help the people who have been injured by floods. I was doing what I thought was what we were voted in to do down here, to look out for those, especially those that are in situations beyond what they can do to help themselves. That sometimes is the role of government. And I was putting that into this bill through my amendment, not through partisanship, not try to give somebody a black eye, but to try to make somebody's life out there who suffered from these floods maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit hope that the state was actually looking out for them. I ask for a no vote in this bill because we have failed, in my opinion, to do that, to do with this legislation what it could become even more than what it is. Thank you.
Representative Sain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I would like to thank Representative Duran for her hard work on this bill. I've seen where this bill has come from, and this is a very thoughtful bill in many, many respects. And a lot of time and thought was put into this by multiple stakeholders, including the Department of Local Affairs. So I do want to express that we are grateful for the hard work and especially the thought put into helping flood victims. That being said, there are some unanswered questions that I have. I will be a no vote on the bill, but I do appreciate the hard work by Representative Duran, so I did want to say that to this body. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the question for the House is the passage of House Bill 1017 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representatives McNulty and Pabon. Close the machine. With 36 aye votes, 24 no votes, 5 excused, and 0 absent, House Bill 1017 is passed. Co-sponsors. Close the machine. Announcements and introductions. Representative McCann.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Health Insurance and Environment Committee, we are working this morning. So we have one bill up. Shouldn't take too long, but we'll meet in about 10 minutes at 10 o'clock down in committee room 107, I mean. Thanks.
Representative Coram.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm reminded Friday I was told that I had a bad joke, and you know, I did not intend it that way, but you know, I'm reminded as adults, as legislators, we often say things that may be taken as they're not meant, and it happens all the time. And I heard a story the other day that just exemplifies this. There was a young man that was in church, small child, didn't read, and he was staring at a plaque and just kept looking and looking, and finally the minister walked up to him and said, "Son, do you have a question?" And he said, "Yes, Reverend." He said, "What is this?" He said, "Well, son, that's a plaque in the memory of all those who died in the service." And the boy looked up very puzzled and said, 8:30 or 11.
Representative Fisher, is this going to be a weekly thing?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, in case you weren't aware, tomorrow the National MS Society will be here and they'll be holding a meeting over in the old Supreme Court chambers, I believe starting at around 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And you're all invited to stop by and meet some of the members and talk with them about the very important issue of multiple sclerosis and the effect that it has on members of our society and our population. So I hope you're all able to stop by there.
Any further announcements or introductions? Representative Duran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Joint Budget Committee will meet at 10:05.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House stand in recess until 1 p.m. this afternoon, at which point we will adjourn, and please listen, until 10 a.m. Wednesday morning, March 5th.
Seeing no objection, the House will stand in recess until 1 p.m. Have fun at caucuses tonight. We'll see you all back here at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.